Right, well, welcome everyone, and welcome to Aspida Group's webinar on Guernsey, a resilient regime. During this, we'll be looking at how us, a small island, continues to be such a financial fortress. We have almost 1,000 investment funds, with well over 2,000 sub-funds administered in the island, with 280 billion assets under management and administration. So throughout this, we'll be discussing the reasons for this, look at the advantage of establishing a fund in Guernsey compared to some of the other jurisdictions. With me today is Stephen Cuddihee. Stephen was until recently the Managing Director of Apex Fund Services in Guernsey, a position he held for 8 years. He's now working as a consultant for us as Aspida, and you see his role as business development, as well as continuing to act as an independent non-executive director on several investment management, private equity boards, specialising in property, private equity and alternative assets. Stephen has over 30 years experience in business development, international investment markets, risk analysis, fund structure and corporate governance compliance, and has also worked at several blue chip financial organisations in a senior management role. He's co-founder of Smart Pension, the auto enrolment platform, which is one of the UK's fastest growing independent auto enrolment providers. And also joining us, someone who perhaps needs no introduction to the Guernsey people present on this webinar, is Dr Andy Sloan. He is Deputy CEO of Strategy of Guernsey Finance, and as we know, he spearheaded the Green Finance and Guernsey Green Funds development here, as well as being responsible for coordinating the development of the financial services strategy. So he's an expert reviewer for the International Panel on Climate Change's 6 assessment reports and a non-executive director of ESI Monitor, an environmental assessment company. He's a member of BVCA's Channel Islands Working Group, the City UK's IRSG's Regulatory Coherence Working Group, and is a member of the Institute of Directors and Institute of Risk. So he's been with Guernsey Finance since August 1st, 2018, which joined from the GFSC. So I'd like to welcome Steve and Andy. So,
thank you.
Hello, Steve. Steve is alongside me, so it'll be fairly easy for me to hand off. Andy will be able to join in now and again as we are. So Andy, I don't know if you're there and able to comment just yet.
Just checking in. You can hear me loud and clear?
Oh, we can. Thank you, Andy, and welcome joining us, and welcome to everyone listening in. A quick talk about the format of this one. You'll be able to type in questions and ask some questions which we'll look at towards the end. If you feel you'd like to speak, then you can actually put in a request, and one of the people will be able to open the program. But so for Andy, you'll just be able to speak up when you wish, and for people listening in, if you just basically request speak, and then we can actually let you in. So really, the first point, going straight back, I think, to really the start of this here, is why is Guernsey a success, and why do we, what makes Guernsey different? And let's look at the regulatory environment first. So, Steve.
Okay, I'll just give a quick overview of Guernsey. So, I mean, I think we've got predominantly a Guernsey audience this morning, but Guernsey is one of the world's largest offshore financial centres. It's got a thriving funds industry. We've got about 1,000 investment funds, well over 2,000 sub-funds, which are all currently administered on the island. And the current value of funds under management and administration in Guernsey, I think, is probably around about 280 billion. One of the advantages of establishing a fund in Guernsey, and what we're going to try and discuss this morning is, when compared with other jurisdictions, why does Guernsey still remain a favourable jurisdiction? And I think, that brings us into the regulatory environment. And we've got 3 subheadings, and the first is the flexibility. So Guernsey maintains a proportionate, flexible, and competitive funds regulatory regime, which adopts a risk-based approach to ensure that appropriate levels of investor protection are maintained, whilst at the same time avoiding the unnecessary complex or burdensome regulation fund managers and promoters of other funds sometimes experience. Guernsey's also, the regulator in Guernsey is also very, very approachable, and they work closely with the funds industry to ensure that the regulatory environment continues to evolve, which I think is very important, and also provides the kind of structures that are required by today's investors. With structures at the moment, and you've seen over the last 5 to 10 years, fund structures are changing. People are looking at different mechanisms in which to bring investors to market, etc. So it's a very fluid environment. I mean, myself at the moment, on one of the projects I'm working on a social impact funds in the UK, which is really interesting, a new development which is involving pension funds, etc. So Guernsey has to stay ahead of the curve on all these points.
Yes, Steve. So, Andy, you were with the GFSC for a while. I mean, what sort of feedback can you give us from the inside, if you like, from what you're allowed to say, about the GFSC sort of approach? Obviously, whilst you were there, the flexibility, the ability for us to and people to go to the GFSC and say, "Hi, we got this great plan." And again, what happens then? What do they do? I mean, they got this this great, I think, reputation for being approachable and listening. So can you give us some sort of feedback, if you like, from when you were there, and perhaps even as you deal with them now?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to be glib, but they're real life human beings that work at the GFSC, and they're genuine people and they're nice people. So in actual fact, I think one thing it's very easy for us to be glib and talk about our flexible regime and our innovation, etc. But actually, to take for granted the fact that you can pick up the phone and you can speak to the director or one of the teams within the regulator and be able to get some degree of guidance and indication and help. You don't get that in London. And frankly, you don't get that in Luxembourg too. I think we take it for granted who we are. And somebody asked me, we're talking about the subject of the day being resilience and such. And, I look back at it and quite frankly, I look out the window and I remember being at the GFSC and looking out the window and speaking to, we used to get visiting dignitaries all over the shop. And I remember once speaking to the UK, the Austrian ambassador to the UK who had come across for one of his nice sort of diplomacy trips, and putting out the window and say, look at that wall there, it's made of granite. And in fact, that's what this island is made of. If I was to use it, it's maybe a bit hackney cliche, but to describe what we have at the core of our offer as a jurisdiction, it is that fundamental DNA. We are a granite, we are rock solid jurisdiction. You look at the levels of service, you look at the levels of sophistication. What we do, we're a global asset servicer. We service sophisticated clients, be it whether it's providers like Aspida and others, but people aren't listening on the call, but we have a regulator that has been designed for that purpose. And that is something you just don't get elsewhere. So, what's the sort of the USP of our regulatory regime? It is the closeness and the ability to interact, to get that response. It's the lead-in times. You ask, we got asked, what's our offer vis-a-vis Luxembourg, for instance? And he said, well, look, we're proven, we're faster, we're smarter, we're cheaper. The ecosystem of Guernsey is just built to be a specialist servicer, a global asset servicer, servicing sophisticated clients. And to come to the resilient regime point, why did we, during COVID-19, why did we manage to continue business uninterrupted, pretty much as usual? Well, just look at us. We're an island of 7 miles by 4. We don't have 200,000 people trying to commute in and commute out of Luxembourg. We don't have millions of people trying to get into the city or get into the Isle of Dogs on a morning and cramming into sort of tubes. We've got a very blessed with a fortunate, healthy lifestyle. We have an ecosystem of 10, 12,000 people working in the finance sector in close quarters, and we were able to adapt, knowing each other and have that closeness, that connectedness as a jurisdiction, as a community, and as a finance sector. And it meant we've got that inbuilt resilience to be able to defer to our, immediately almost to our, DR sort of processes and programs. The fact that we're all able to decamp to home and to work there. My wife runs, is head of a trust accounting for a large institution, and we have continued throughout with the resilience of our IT, the resilience of with the broadband and the Wi-Fi, and the resilience of the institutions who have the strength of the processes inbuilt. And I would say this from basically a pedigree and a history of following processes properly and proportionately. The fact that we as a finance sector adopt international standards, proper practices and processes, and it is not just window dressing. It is, we don't pay lip service to it. That is who we are, and that is what we do. And I think that is very much the DNA of the jurisdiction, and it enables us to have that, like you said, that financial fortress, that ability to continue to service clients throughout what has been probably the most tumultuous 3 months of global events that I'll hope to ever live through.
And actually picking up what you're saying about the fortress within there, obviously with the whole COVID thing, Guernsey as a fortress has just proved with the fact that just yesterday we went down to 0 live cases. We got completely on top of everything. Now, if we actually look to somewhere like Luxembourg, who, of course, a lot, whilst their workers will be remote, in Guernsey now, we're coming back, from this, really from next week, people are coming back into the office. But in Luxembourg, I hear the borders are still closed with Belgium, borders are still closed with Germany. Their workforce is not based in Guernsey, sorry, in Luxembourg for there, where our workforce is. And so
you're absolutely right. I mean, there is a reason why. I mean, in terms of you flagged up my green finance credentials earlier, but there's an absolute reason why, in terms of global carbon emissions, in terms of per capita, Luxembourg is very high because of that commuting in and out from France and Germany every morning and every evening. But not to sort of throw sticks at them, but what I'm saying is, if you look to ourselves and the natural structure of the way that we work, with the short commutes, with the living from home, the working from home, that flexibility of working, and that resilience, and we have that natural. People say to what's our offer in ordinary times vis-a-vis our competitors? And it's the service, it's the quality of service, it's the reputation for doing business, it's the turnaround, it's the fact that we actually have firms providing services to other jurisdictions because of the recognition of the quality of what we do. And it's that inbuilt, that inherent strength that is seen us through the COVID-19 period.
And Andy, just on that, I mean, we've had a couple of questions, pre-questions, and one of them, and I think you've covered this quite comprehensively. It is, people have said, we've been using Luxembourg. What can Guernsey offer over Lux? And one of the questions we had from a fund manager was that, they get marketed to by a fair number of Guernsey firms, but when they're asked that question about, what can Guernsey offer over Lux, they feel sometimes it's not been satisfactorily addressed. And I think what you've just articulated is core to why Guernsey, to some extent, is a better jurisdiction than Luxembourg. It's the flexibility, that we offer. It's the approach of the regulator. And I'd add in also that there's a cost there that, the offering from Guernsey is much more cost effective than, from my personal, it's a personal opinion, from a Lux perspective, having dealt with various entities who have done business in Luxembourg. There is a significant cost hike compared to setting up something in Guernsey.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it comes to the point where I have, you go back to some simple things, talking about MPPR versus the passport. And I remember, having to go through the process of distilling it down, what the offer was vis-a-vis the passport, which quite frankly, was proven to be a very ineffective, inefficient way of trying to distribute across Europe. And it came down to the fact that MPPR was proven smarter and faster than the passport. And it comes down to, you know, that what's the elevator pitch, the 30-second pitch is that Guernsey provides you service, it provides you quality, it provides you flexibility, and it provides you a lower cost. It's just an easier place to do business, and it is a more resilient community. It is a stronger ecosystem. You know, it's because it's a specialist service provider, and people know what they're about. Is that, you know, they know what providing service is all about. It is not about getting to lost in some big sort of like machine that is trying to become the world's largest asset gatherer sort of thing. It is about providing you quality of service. It's about providing you a regulatory regime that's flexible. It's about providing you a legal regime that you understand, and it's about providing you service at a cost that you appreciate.
And actually, let's pick off that flexibility actually of the offering, because tied to that, what can Guernsey do that Luxembourg can't do? What can Guernsey do perhaps that Cayman can't do? And this is tied in with our fund offering, I think, which goes right back to the way the GFSC set up the rules rather than law. So because there's rules, then the GFSC has the flexibility to give derogation from those rules and actually come up with rules quite quickly that don't need to go through our states of deliberation for approval. As we know how long the discussion took over whether we can have bonfires or not, heaven knows how long it would take to get a simple change in the law to enable a fund. What that means, though, is that from a fund-wise, you know, let's look at the headlines here: comprehensive, adaptable, evolutionary. Now, evolutionary, Andy, will come to you shortly for evolutionary fund offerings. But Steve, from the fund side, what do you see as how the type of funds we have can help us perhaps compete with other jurisdictions such as Cayman, such as Luxembourg?
Well, it comes down to the enactment of the law, which is the PIO law, which kind of splits the Guernsey funds into two categories, which is one is the registered funds, which are registered with the GFSC, and secondly, authorised funds, which are authorised by the GFSC. And the difference between the two is essentially that authorised funds receive their authorisation following a substantial review of the suitability by the GFSC, whereas registered funds receive their registration following a representation of suitability from a Guernsey body holding a PI license, which is the administrator, who scrutinise the fund and its promoter in lieu of the GFSC, and takes on the ongoing responsibility for monitoring that fund. So I think we've got a fairly simple process in Guernsey in terms of the regulation and how it's applied. And that then goes into, you know, Guernsey has a comprehensive range of fund structures, whether they're open or closed. And this is, I think it complements the UK to a certain extent, because we're not really, you know, the UK is going through a situation where it's divorcing itself from the EU. That is still up in the air. But most of the UK fund structures that are generated on the open-ended side are more retail structures. We're not really a genuinely retail structure, so we're not necessarily competing with the UK. We're acting as a complement. So we've got, you know, the types of open-ended. We've got the Class B structures. We've got the Class Q structures. We can set up funds in either companies, protected cells, which, you know, we go back further. You know, Guernsey was at the forefront, you know, developed the PCC structure. Then we've got incorporated cell structures, and also unit trusts used to a lesser extent, and limited partnerships. And it's, you know, it's in the development of limited partnerships over the last 15, 20 years that has been the core of our ability to access the private equity market that, you know, Guernsey is well renowned for.
And that comes to the adaptable side, doesn't it? So anything out there, any development, then Guernsey tends to be able to look at what's happening, and in some cases leave the world. We say in PCCs and in the Guernsey Green Funds. In other cases, see what's happening and rapidly do the same as necessary. And I always feel, from a fund administrative perspective, that almost any type of fund done, that we can replicate it in Guernsey. I mean, yes, we don't have a UCITS brand, but quite frankly, there's not many fund administration companies in Guernsey that actually want to run a UCITS product. You know, we have the Class A scheme, but, you know, that's mostly mostly fallen by to be fair.
But you have to remember from the UCITS also, I mean, it's a slow moving vehicle. There are a certain number of investment restrictions. It doesn't give you the freedom of our Class B funds or our private equity. You know, there's much more freedom in the investment investment ability of those structures to invest in a wide range of financial instruments.
And I think we'll come to that actually a little bit, is that of course our service providers are regulated, which is key point. So that we're very visibly regulated. Before we get on to that bit, let's talk about the evolutionary side of this. And you know, Andy, you know, both as Guernsey Finance generally, which is out there promoting what we do, seeing what sort of steps we can take, you know, and of course you develop the Guernsey Green Funds. You know, tell us a little bit about the evolutionary processes and what Guernsey Finance tries to do to help push what you do, see what's happening in the world, if you like, and pick up that and how Guernsey can react and then sometimes lead.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'm happy to. And it comes back to something Stephen was saying earlier, and I sort of was listening in terms of our regulatory regime and the funds regime. Yeah, in 3 words, it's simple, it's flexible, and it's fast. The turnaround times that we're talking about, you know, 3 days for the PIF, etc., are not they're not made up. They're actual. And in terms of our resilience over this period, you know, Emma Bailey, who had to head up of authorization, she's been in the office throughout this period. I've been on calls with her, and then during this period, we've turned around new rules, and there'll be some being published. This isn't in the fund sector, but in the insurance sector, some new rules being published tomorrow that have been at the request or, you know, in response to industry requests. And similarly, the ability for the GFSC to turn around applications during that period. There was a very good period in terms of authorizations of new funds going through. But business was down new business was down over the last few weeks, but there was business being submitted and turned around and authorized from the GFSC. And Stephen's point, absolutely, in terms of that flexibility of the regime, you know, PIF, authorized, registered, it's a very simple regime. I was at a seminar last November, I think it was, in London, talking about financing fintech through Guernsey funds, and that flexibility was very much front and center. We had 3 different managers from London who are using Guernsey for different things. One of them was using a PIS, one of them was using a Class B, as Stephen mentioned. You know, because the ability for the fund to cater for for just about all requirements from a quite simple, straightforward regime was an incredibly powerful offering. But in terms of that development, which you're asking me about. And I'll also actually come back a bit. You can get things through in terms of the changing the regulations very quickly. In terms of when we introduced, and this is going back to being at the GFSC, we changed our pensions regime. We enhanced the regulation of our pensions regime to ensure that as a jurisdiction, we were able to conform to international standards, that we regulated pension providers for the purposes of providing pensions. And we went through that process in terms of changing the regulations and getting the approvals from what is now Policy and Resources, from the committee, and affecting those at the states, and getting the 3 different parliaments of the bailiwick to agree to them. Was in the process of less than 3 or 4 months. So we changed the law, introduced new regulations, and consulted on the guidance in a very short time period. And so that ability to be fleet of foot and nimble is something that you get from the jurisdiction. So in terms of the process, that's what we're able to do. It's a different DNA that you get here. In that, if you are, you're living and breathing in a jurisdiction where our ecosystem is so tight and so connected, in the way that, I make a laugh and a joke about it. Back in the day before we were social distancing and before we were working in the office, I'd go out for a sandwich at lunchtime for a quick 10-minute walk, and you'd come back 2 hours later having had so many discussions. There was no such thing as 6 degrees of separation in Guernsey. It's more like 1.5, because that is the closeness of our community and our ecosystem. But what it does allow for is for us to take that more open mindset, that more sort of holistic view to things, knowing that you've got the ability to have all of the policy levers within your gift, And so it enables us with our DNA to be able to respond, to adapt, to make changes that we know are for the better of clients and managers, across the globe, because we're able to take that thought through 360-degree view. I mean, we've had this. We've all worn several different hats while we've been in Guernsey, and all worked for different organisations in different capacities, and it leads to an embedding and an increasing in a general expertise and experience, which I think feeds through to an approach that is designed for and caters the needs of sophisticated clients internationally.
I do have to say, I take back the bonfire comments on the on the States based on your better experience there.
Oh no, the bonfire is absolutely right.
But also, I do like the fact that when a potential client comes with a plan, you can nearly always say, yes, we can do this, and then figure out how we fit it into the rules, which is so flexible again on that side. Even when you have these near fund offerings, certificates which sort of might be sort of not funds per se, but we can still look after those in the fund world. And the GFSC again, again comes back to the approachability, doesn't it? It's the circle. Everything we're talking about here, resilience of Guernsey, is actually tied into the regulator, the fund offering, the service providers. It's all of it all together. It's a big picture. So it's hard to talk about one without bringing into the other, always jumping ahead.
Absolutely, Richard. And that's if I jump in on that, because actually you've just triggered a thought in my mind there. In the term we talk about, where does the resilience of the jurisdiction come from? And I was explaining about being our DNA, about our general ecosystem, that granite. But what it comes down to effectively is that and it's not been rhetoric, but it's been reality. Is that we are a centre of genuine substance. We're a substantive centre, like I said, 10 to 12,000 people employed in the sector, providing services, and that. That sort of response that we've had over the last 2 or 3 years to that international pressure from first the European Commission and then the OECD about substance requirements meant that genuinely we were not really making substantive change to our working practices, because in actual fact we were a reality, a centre of substance, and so therefore we were legislatively, and I used to say we were making the de jure catching up with the de facto, as in we were just making the legislative catch up with what worked in practice. And and for us and for me, that has been very much a what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I've always said throughout the process that this would leave the jurisdiction stronger and more competitively positioned. And I do believe we have found that. Maybe it hasn't been a tsunami of business over the last 6 months, but definitely I found myself speaking to many people that talking about servicing North American business through Cayman, that actually they weren't looking for they found the degree of confidence that knowing that Guernsey was not a jurisdiction going to be blacklisted anytime soon. We've got absolutely always on the side of angels, always ensuring it met the international standards. I used to walk around in the European Commission corridors back in 2011, 2012, and able to say that we used to exchange information automatically under EUSD measures, unlike certain member states. And the French and the Germans knew exactly who I was alluding to at that time. And all throughout that last decade, we've always been on the right side of the international standards, ensuring that we're a genuine centre of substance. And I have seen, we've had these conversations, that other jurisdictions are always trying to play catch up and me too, but found themselves getting caught up and tripped up at different occasions. And so therefore I do believe that in terms of that service, to looking east, young man, but also substance looking west, young man, is something that we have, that shield of steel of the ability to basically, we've got a strong service and we've got great substance. So I think it's the twin strengths of the jurisdiction allied to the flexibility and the fastness of the funds regime is, effectively I am describing a resilient jurisdiction.
Andy, just picking up on your reference to Cayman, Cayman have obviously been put on the blacklist, and without wishing to be spiteful, they will come off that. It effectively will be a temporary measure. They've enacted the requisite legislation to comply. They just didn't do it in enough time. But I think, beyond that, and there has been a move because of the blacklisting of certain promoters and other managers to consider moving their funds, and hopefully we will pick up a number in Guernsey. But I think, more importantly, there are some more subtle differences too between the jurisdictions. I think, when you look at Cayman, you don't have to have on-island administrators. We do in Guernsey. It would have been interesting to see in the COVID-19 pandemic that, obviously we're still going through how they've coped within Cayman and how dealing with their customers, because many of the administrators are not actually in Cayman. And even with their, directors, of not necessarily, those rules will change, but at the present time, not necessarily having to have local-based directors. So I think from that perspective, as you go back, our resilience, there are subtle differences that I think we should continue to push and will push in relation to, the advantage that Guernsey has over some other jurisdictions.
And if I actually could add into there, it's not just over Cayman. I think our substance rules provide advantages to Guernsey. It's also places like Luxembourg as well, because their rules really tie people down to needing physical presence in the office, numbers of people employed. And although our rules require FTE equivalents, they don't need to be specific employers of that organisation. It can be through administrators doing the work and obviously the directors doing the work. So our substance laws provide an awful lot of flexibility. But to me, we're very much, and I like proving how much these the resilience relies on everything here. It comes back to the GFSC's POI law, where it demanded substance from the directors, and so it's something that we can say we've been doing for so many years that when it came to tax compliance, it was like, tick tick tick, we do this because actually Guernsey has great service providers. The administrators are good, the lawyers are good.
Absolutely. I mean, it's almost sorry talking hoary old cliches. But effectively, it's the fact that our substance is reality, not rhetoric, and that analogues across into that our resilience was reality, not rhetoric, and it was built on the basis of the fact that we had that genuine substance there, that ecosystem, that 10,000-12,000 people on the island servicing clients, close-knit community, that ability, not widely dispersed, either cross-border. Sort of servicing models. It's on island and it's servicing on island, and that resilient, that granite at the heart of what we do. So again, like I said, it sounds like a cliche, but it's not. But it's actuality. And to come to that point about Cayman and such, it's not. You're absolutely right. The chances are that decision might be changed. But quite frankly, I'll point to the fact that you go back to the ESMA passporting sort of review back in 2015, 2016, when I was at the GFSC. There was only 3 jurisdictions that passed it first time out: ourselves and our cousins across the water, and Switzerland. There were 3 jurisdictions that got it correct, that understand what the actuality meant, rather than they're trying to do the window dressing version of it. And there were only 3 jurisdictions that were ever deemed to be completely sort of compliant with their bifurcated AFMD regimes. And I go back to 2014, and the FCA blacklisted certain jurisdictions for a fleeting moment. And if you look at the track record, and it's the underlying, the evidence is that in terms of us, who we are as a jurisdiction, we are who we say we are. It's not that the propaganda is far away from the reality. What we are providing is a fast, flexible regime and a strong, sophisticated service. And you put those two together, and that gives you a resilience that is natural.
Absolutely, and actually we add on to that, thinking about the quality of the people we have here. Let's just sort of touch on the administrators for a moment. We got big names here, we got niche players, we got the wide range. But what I think is so important compared to maybe some other jurisdictions is that we are regulated, and we are visibly regulated. So the GFSC come in and put the fear of God up us, sometimes correctly, but we know that we are going to be under their scrutiny. There is no doubt about it, whether it's by thematics, and they ask what our procedures are, or whether it's by actual physical visit. And so we're all on the ball. These aren't just sort of You know, the money laundering rules and regulations aren't just things that there's law and we go, yeah. No, we do them, because if we don't, we'll be found out, you know. So to me, the visible regulation is also a very important point. And you can look to jurisdictions such as the UK, where you might be doing a closed-ended sort of investment vehicle type thing, but the service provider, the administrator, might barely be regulated by the FCA or not at all. Whereas here, you know that the service provider doing the work for you is going to be under the scrutiny of the GFSC, and will be acting as though they are under the scrutiny of the GFSC, because we all know it happens. You know, they do come and look at us, and that actually is part of our strength, and it makes us good operators. It makes us careful about what we do. It's the same with the directors, the non-executive directors for the various entities. Their livelihoods depend on doing a proper job and actually being part of that oversight function. So again, everything that's done in the island helps strengthen the resilience. So it's just all pieces together, from the regulator to the people to the rules and laws.
And, you know, we go back a long time. So, you know, the industry here goes back over 40 years. So we've got that depth. We've got that depth of experience. We've got that depth of quality of administrators, of lawyers, of accountants. And we've got depth of professional non-exec directors who have been involved in the industry, have participated in the industry, and then over the years have decided to become independent non-execs and play a significant part in the role of ensuring that, you know, we meet our standards, we meet our compliance and the corporate governance standards that are put in place. So you know, we have that strength in depth.
Yeah, for me, it's a classic sort of economies of scale advantage. You know, it is you got the cluster, if you like, of experience and knowledge, award-winning lawyers, big named auditors. You know, we're all here. We're all in the island, and we all work blowny hard, to use a Guernsey expression, to make sure it works well.
And I think that's been recognised now. So, you know, Guernsey maintains a large presence in alternative funds and private equity funds. The island's a dominant player in the funds of funds market, and you know, it's not necessarily a typical centre for hedge funds, but there are certain hedge funds that are still done here. But you know, from my perspective, I think we're moving more towards the PE, to the green, to the social impact type structures that will now, you know, develop and continue.
So this is almost actually looking at what makes us an innovator, really, which is why I just forwarded the screen. And actually, if you look at our history, you know, sort of back in the 60s when Guernsey first started, we were perhaps helping support some of the UK-based funds, and certainly through the 90s we were doing hedge funds. That's when the B schemes came to their fore.
Yeah.
You know, we're right at the development there of being regulated investments that could be done here. And then, as you so rightly said, came the PE funds. But all of that shows a history of us working and moving, changing, and flexibility, while still maintaining the core ability to provide almost services to any type of fund, any type of investment vehicle. But what's next? I mean, here, Andy, you're I feel, you know, with Guernsey Finance perhaps at the forefront of helping design, if you like, or look at the next products. You came up with a Guernsey Green Fund. You know, that was first to market. No brilliance there. Working with the regulator with their sandbox. So what do you see on the horizon here, Andy?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it goes to and it explains that approach that we can take as a jurisdiction, that closeness of our community, that we're able to design the Guernsey Green Fund through basically, working groups of people from the regulator, from industry, from other stakeholders, working together to design a regime that works. And you're absolutely right. It was a world first fund regime, and it still is the world first, while the EU, you know, messes around on its regulatory technical standards of the EU taxonomy and douses everyone in tar and feathers in terms of process required for sustainable financial disclosures. We have a does what it says on the tin regime that provides transparency and confidence in the underlying assets, which is broadly what fund managers need. And that's what we designed it so, because we were able to go out to the market, go to London and ask people what it is they felt was going to be required. There are other areas over the last few years where we've able to be develop things, and in a similar vein and a similar approach. People probably are sad to say unaware of the fact that we introduced a change to our legislative arrangements for in the digital area. We introduced what's called the Electronic Agents Ordinance back in January 2019, which was for an avoidance of doubt legislative proposal that smart contracts were legal contracts. If you look at the UK, they set up a royal commission to look at this vexing issue, and in Guernsey, we have managed to introduce and provide a legislative and certain framework for people operating here that supports machine learning, electronic contracts, smart contracts, and in financial services, where everything has moved online and moved to rules-based and transactions between one electronic entity to another. That's a very, very advantageous position to be in. We made it our objective to be a jurisdiction where we had the most supportive environment for the application of technology. And one thing that we haven't touched on in the call is talking about the movement that we've had on the electronic CDD. We made it an objective as well, that we wanted to ensure that we could rapidly adopt new techniques of due diligence and AML, exploiting technology, be it blockchain, be it whatever. And at a similar time last year, our regulator made it clear that they saw no hindrance to the adoption of technology in this area, and they were happy to give. And I remember going back to it, and we used another Latin phrase. We're happy to give an ex ante review. And that was the way that we managed to sort of coax the commission into acknowledging they would, kick the tires of things beforehand, give a view and a perspective before adoption of technology, which is again another world first. I think to have that guidance from the regulator. And what we've seen over the recent weeks is what I'd say a widely embedding of that new electronic practice. I've done a bit of my own AML, with photos and whatever. Electronically over the last few weeks, and I think and it will be maybe one of those benefits of COVID-19, a bit of a silver lining type thing, is I think we would have fast forwarded the adoption of technology. I think what we've seen is the rules and the practices being there, and we've had others. It's been a caution and a reticence among practitioners to exploit the technology for fear of not being correct. And I think that we've the crisis is that's basically has given people the opportunity to sort of make that jump and more widely embed it. But in terms of what we're looking at more broadly, you're absolutely right on the green fund space. Obviously, you've got Ties Green too, but we've also been looking at with the ILS. Like I said, there's an insurance rules and guidance new product being announced by the GFSC tomorrow. So it's about the not standing still and the ability for us all to work together and identify market needs and look to how we can respond to those needs and provide a kosher, proportionate, and reliable, legitimate product.
Well, I can certainly speak to my experience on the technology front. I think personally, I must have saved half a dozen trees with the amount of paper I'm no longer needing to print out to sign documents. And I think you're right. Technology is suddenly become very much more acceptable. Presentations such as this, far more meetings being held online. Suddenly, bizarrely, the world is almost a smaller place because everyone's more willing to deal with tech now.
And I think also, when you look at the administrators, the larger administrators, they're all embracing electronic CDD. It makes their operation run smoother. They're becoming, my old company, Apex, talking to some of the guys there of what they're doing internally on electronic CDD. It's becoming ever more sophisticated. So given that, we go back to how we started this presentation webinar, the flexibility, the approachability of the GFSC, they've taken that decision in relation to electronic CDD which I think will pay huge dividends going forward, particularly, as you say, after we come out. When that will be is unclear, the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think, working practices may some working practices as a result of the pandemic may change forever. But we have the flexibility to and fleet of foot to be able to move with the times and adapt. New technology that will continue to give us that edge in the market.
Yeah, and on the technology front, Steve, we take certain things for granted. In fact, the resilience of our bandwidth, the fact that it wasn't necessarily designed; it was accident 10, 15 years ago when the pipes were put in, where we had redundancy of provision of the big pipes, the big broadband pipes off the island. I'm talking about now, and so we've had that bandwidth for years. In terms of off island and the strength and resilience of it, the resilience of our electricity, the resilience of our workforce, it is. Being a, you say no man is an island, but being a small island community, it builds in a resilient, hardy attitude to getting things done. I think the reflection of what the providers and the service, the fact that the moving to the DR processes was virtually similar. People were moving to that before lockdown. Lockdown happened, and it didn't really make much. It was marginal difference in the impact of what people were doing because they were already in that mindset. And I think it comes down to that DNA, that mindset of that close community built on that rock of granite. Like I say, it's an allegory, but it's a truism. No,
I agree, and long may it continue. And it's the cooperation between all the parties here. You can still. I've been talking to Guernsey lawyers and auditors, etc. throughout the COVID. Everyone's been available, and I think that's because we live where we live, and it's very easy to contact people, to speak to people, to get advice, and to continue to do what you normally do. In a working week. So I've been very, very pleased with how things have worked. As you said, there may have been a slight hiccup at the beginning, but everyone's embraced, the remote access working from home, and from the funds that I sit on, or the management companies, we've seen very, very little interference or drop off in service levels throughout the pandemic.
Right, and just before we move on to the questions, again, I guess almost a summary then of the very first question, what made Guernsey a resilient and attractive regime. It is just because the people are good, the regulator's good, the rules we operate to are good, we're flexible, we're adaptive, we're just brilliant. I mean, that's why we're so resilient, because everyone in Guernsey is just so brilliant. And I think that's a suitable point, I suspect, to end the main part of the presentation and move onto the questions. Now, at this point, being not very techie, I might need support from our guys in the background. Any questions have come up?
I'm looking at one from Chris about what efforts being made to target Guernsey as a jurisdiction for US managed funds, and I suppose that's probably possibly best to be answered from a Guernsey Finance perspective. If you go back, Chris, to the policy framework, which was published in December 2018, and strategically for the setting out a series of objectives for the jurisdiction, very much placed New York front and center as the number one target jurisdiction. That is after London, obviously. Let's not discount that. And if you look at the ties and the natural affinity we have with the US market, and particularly in a post-COVID world, I think that's going to get even more so. So it has been a priority for Guernsey Finance in terms of a target for marketing efforts. Last year there were several the business development trips planned, and there were several more for this year. And unfortunately, I think we found that obviously with COVID, the June one was off. But I think looking going forward, we're probably unlikely to see a return to the physical business development marketing trips anytime soon. And I'll say that with, in a purely agnostic way, whether that's ourselves, whether that's London, whether that's the US. I think you're going to find crossing borders in terms of a business development trip and 14 days isolation after the event a bit cumbersome. But we are planning to look at moving to the online world and virtual marketing trips. We have Sustainable Finance Week, which is in Guernsey in 2 weeks' time. Obviously, physically in Guernsey, but it's geographically and time zone based in Guernsey in 2 weeks' time. What we're looking to do there is that New York always had a Climate Finance Week in September, and taking a virtual version of our sustainability discussions to New York, because we have found, and I've got a conversation this afternoon, in fact, actually, with some guys from Houston, some PE guys from Houston in Texas, about the Green Finance Initiative and how to exploit. I don't use that pejorative word, but exploit the robustness and the integrity of the regime to help move investments into a sustainable energy strategy for them out there. And similarly, in terms of back to the New York story, in that it is a storyline. If you look at the clever money, you look at Goldman Sachs talking about pivoting 750 billion of their clients' money to green finance by 2030. You look at JP Morgan. Yes, I know that they've had their issues with the board, but as well as everything else, they are big on supporting sustainability generally. And obviously with Bloomberg, it's those three institutions have come together to form the New York Sustainable Alliance, and around that we have the ability to then pitch ourselves and to reinforce and revisit the messaging about the basic, the Janet and John stuff we've been talking about today, the real basic knitting stuff, the fastness, the flexibility of the regime, the strength of service, and take that to a US audience. And also that we've got plans to take that to a private wealth audience. So in terms of the states for this year, it will be based around looking at those virtual business development marketing trips around green finance, around private capital, and around the strength and getting across the core strengths of our regime. The service and the flexibility and the speed to market. So hopefully that would answer your question, Chris. And I'd say get involved, contact us, either by myself or by my colleague James Crawford, to get involved in how we're going to take that virtual marketing to the States in Q3, Q4.
Andy, I've got one question without putting you on the spot. It's a very current topic. It's how will Guernsey Finance react if we look east to Hong Kong, China markets, particularly Hong Kong, given that overnight the US have basically said that Hong Kong no longer has that special relationship or whatever, and the Chinese are trying to implement the new security law. How do you, and you may not know, so I am putting you on the spot, how do you view potential money coming out of that part of the world, China, Hong Kong, into Guernsey? Do you think that will affect it, or? Let
me make it clear that I'm speaking in a personal capacity now, just in case I stray over any boundaries. I don't think it's really for me to comment on US foreign policy. In terms of where they are, it's interesting developments, and I think geopolitically, I'd be remiss if I hadn't said it's given us pause to reflect on what is going to be happening with global capital flows. And I say that with my strategy head on. You can appreciate over the last few months, it's a conversation that's been going, we've been going around the block on a few times. But that said, in Hong Kong, I have had discussions overnight with, in fact, I've got a call next week, the briefing call is with tomorrow with the strategic advisor to the Hong Kong Green Finance Institute, Ben McQuay. And we'll be picking up on these issues with him. But overnight, I've had emails from a Hong Kong fund manager putting me in touch with the Guernsey offices of the Hong Kong offices of Guernsey law firms, talking about hooking ourselves up and help. And they said, things are more back to normal now. And I said to him, quite frankly, and this was overnight, I said, I thought because he's got family on island, so he was visiting. I saw him about 3 months ago. I said, I thought you were staying over here for the duration. And he basically said, no, we decided that actually Hong Kong was a safer place given everything else than the UK. So we went back to Hong Kong, and frankly, everything's back to normal now. Yeah, the demonstrations have kicked off again. I think it's almost when you're in Hong Kong, the business community sees it slightly differently. There's a bit more of a business just carrying on, keep calm and carry on type attitude about certain stuff. I'd be, foolish or naive to say it's not going to have an issue, but I do think it would. The big geopolitical crowds, etc. I do see an analogy to other jurisdictions where the owners of private wealth and serious private wealth, will be looking for jurisdictions that can give them security and stability. And in that respect, our offer and our pitch to Hong Kong is a bit more of a fundamental offer about if you're looking for a jurisdiction that conforms to international standards, that's kosher. And quite frankly, we've been in China for 10 years. And what we have there is we have the smile of the Chinese government. What we have is we had the 3 regulatory agreements with the insurance, the banking, and the securities regulator. Clearly, there are only 2 regulators now, but there's still 3 different regimes. And we were the only offshore jurisdiction that had those 3. So we have that, implicit smile of the Chinese government, the Communist Party. We have the links with Hong Kong. We conform to international standards on tax transparency, and we provide that stable, secure regime. And I think that's a compelling offer to owners of private wealth in Hong Kong. And it should be something we should be making every effort to ensure people register and recognise.
I'm glad to hear that, and I totally agree from a personal perspective.
But conscious of where we are with time, Andy, you can see the questions. We can't because we're sharing the screen with the presentation. So are there any more questions you've got there, Andy?
Sorry about that. I have a good habit of turning my mic off every time I finish speaking. But no, I think we had a couple of questions. I think we covered them off. We covered them off on the US and the China. Maintaining links with China. Again, it's a geopolitical question that we have. It's not for us to say. I think we just have to be cognizant of the fact that these international relationships will change. It might be a change of emphasis, a relative rebalancing of resources. And I think what we're going to be needing to do is fundamentally also pivoting ourselves to being recognizing that we'll be needing to put more resources into demonstrating our core integrity and stability. But in terms of the questions, no, that's broadly it. There are China and US questions broadly, and broadly aiming at the what we're looking at in terms of marketing. I think we've covered them all off, and looking at that, we've just gone over the hour mark, so that's probably not a bad start.
Absolutely. So just before we finish then, I'm obliged to let you all know about our next webinar run by Aspida Group, which is on building business resilience. It sort of builds up on this one to some extent, where we'll be joined by Ben Morgan, partner and head of the corporate finance group at Careys. So I'd just like to finish by thanking you all for attending and thanking you very much, Andy, for your contribution to this very interesting topic. And it's been great to hear as well how you and what Guernsey Finance are doing really to help build up the resilience of Guernsey and Ireland. And of course, thank you very much, Steve, as well for helping with this presentation.
My pleasure. And thank you, Andy.
Cheers now.
Thank you all. Thank you very much, everyone.